Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Julie and I discuss an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. It is co-written by Matt Barnum and Douglas Belkin. It is entitled, Trump Gears Up for an Assault on Wokeness with Education Overhaul. And it's going to look at the talk about abolishing the Department of Education and other things. Our question from a listener is my absolute favorite question ever, and I'm not exaggerating. We've had over 300 SpeakPipe questions, and we have had hundreds and hundreds more, like more than 300, before we started using SpeakPipe that you guys would send in my email. It's from a student who's homeschooled, who listens regularly to our podcast, and she has been inspired and thinks a career in admissions sounds really exciting. She wants to know, what do I need to do if I want to position myself to get hired in a career in college admissions? Hillary joins me to answer this question. We also give advice for the parent in their 30s, 40s, or 50s who may want to transition to a career in either college admissions or college counseling. We will have the final part of the interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford, founders of Initial View, the company that launched Glimpse Video, and they will be discussing more tips for what you should do and not do in your Glimpse video that your student submits to various colleges. And for our spotlight, we have the final part of my interview with Fabrizio Delosio, the Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment Management and the Executive Director for Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Tennessee. And he helps us to understand the University of Tennessee at Knoxville.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Well, we got a doozy of an article today. You know, Ju and I went back and forth between a couple articles, kind of addressing the same thing, but, you know, a little different. So, you know, Eric Hoover from the Chronicle, we've been featuring quite a bit recently. He wrote an article called Republicans Back in Charge of Congress Aim to Increase Higher Ed Accountability. And then there's another article, and we're going back and forth. Which one did we talk about? There's another article that came out, and this one it's by Matt Barnum and Douglas Belkin in the Wall Street Journal, and it's called Trump Gears Up for Assault on Wokeness with Education Overhaul. So I kind of read both and probably will draw on points from both of them. But you know, the purpose of the discussion is to look at what is going to change. You got a new administration, all 3 branches of government, and there's some clear intent to make major changes to education. We don't know what actually is going to happen yet. So what are those changes that they're being talked about? Well, the most ambitious one is just completely dismantling the Department of Education. And that was a campaign promise that was ran on. I mean, recently, Elon Musk has said they're going to do it. Many people say they're going to do it. Like, this would be just completely radical. I think it's so radical, Julia, that I don't think it's going to happen. But there are going to be major shakeups. One of the reasons that I think that will be difficult to happen is the breadth of things that the Department of Education protects. If you were to dismantle the Department of Education, you're talking about overhauling all of the student lending that we talk about all the time. The talk is sending it to the states. I just think that would end up being a nightmare. So much so to the point that I personally don't think that one's going to happen. Now, some of the things that I think are definitely going to happen, they're talking about restricting the use of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Also, things related to transgender, protecting free speech on campus for conservative students. It's definitely going to be a focus there. These things I think are inevitable. There's talk of much more emphasis. Now, this is not higher ed, but much more emphasis on like vouchers for private schools. And there's much more talk about that. There's talk about having short-term and non-credit boot camps for students without providing safeguards, really, and really pulling back on some of the aggressive accountability measures for profit colleges. The conservative administration has always been much more in favor of the for-profit sector. So you can look for a lot of things there. Cutting down on campus protests. And, in the past, they had an endowment tax of 1.4%, an excise tax, and it's on wealthier colleges. And that I see that definitely coming back. Probably like this whole talk of tariffs, like places like where you are close to Harvard, they better get ready because I think they're going to be a real target in a major way. They're going to be a punching bag. I see them likely probably increasing their taxes on endowments. But there's some other things that the article talked about as well. What were your takeaways of some of the things that are at least the plan of what they hope to do if they're able to be successful?
Well, before I'm really just trying to take deep breaths and lower my heart rate.
Higher ed, one more thing to battle,
I know, I guess, and full disclosure, obviously, I think the listeners have heard, but also, lending really matters a lot to me when it comes to college as well too. I'm gonna go and really hope that you're correct, because I see a little bit bleaker of a picture, but you're completely right, Mark, that we don't actually know a lot of these things for sure just yet.
Well, Julia, I do think there's massive changes are happening. Massive
Yes.
changing. The only thing I don't know about is getting rid of the Department of Education and taking everything to the states. That's the only thing that I'd be surprised if they're able to pull that off. I think there will be a lot of it. So to me, that falls in the category of getting rid of Obamacare. Okay, like what do you have when in its place?
Right.
And I think it's one of those things that sounds good in theory, but the complete revamping of it, and you actually did bring up one of the areas where you're going to see a lot of it, which is the policies on lending. That's a big one, because the past administration had been a lot more sensitive to the loan forgiveness and some of the, those costs that got passed on, especially to first-gen families making under six figures and being saddled with that for a really, really long time. That has not been something that had been a sympathetic. The new administration is not sympathetic to those voices. And so how things like loan forgiveness and things like that are going to play out, I am not optimistic on things like that.
No,
not at all. Yeah.
No. And for a lot of the other things that you had mentioned that you think would happen, we have seen, just like with loan forgiveness, we have actually seen this be practiced already, right? So we do already have states that do stipulate, certainly you're allowed to include religion in the way you go about. This is more for public K through 12, but certainly I think I do think I guess I'll be honest, I do think that department's going to go away.
Wow.
Yeah,
you might be right. I don't know. You might be right. Like, I really don't know.
Oh, I really hope I'm wrong. I really hope I am. I do think it's massive, but what I would say is that even with some of these other massive overhauls, like that, maybe not as extreme as that, we're gonna end up in that situation when you're not allowed. I do really believe about the subsidies for private school. I really do believe that, and so as we siphon out federal dollars from K through 12 public, that is only going to make the higher ed landscape that much more bleak. And so we will find ourselves, I think, in a situation where college is, or 4-year college is just not a thing for a lot or vast majority of students, between not being able to afford to go and also not having the resources K through 12 that would allow you to be on that path. And I think the listeners know too, like Title IX and gender identity matters a great deal to me as well. And
that's under assault. That's toast.
Yes.
That's toast.
So like, I know, like I came into my school the next day, and I think a lot of DEIB, that's, deans of, folks who work in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, or justice.
Oh, that's brutal for them. Like, if you had a job in that area, you bet it's time to start putting your resume out in the street.
Yes. And so, and it is great that we have minority serving institutions and HBCUs, and the amount of low income first gen or BIPOC students that do go to a predominantly white institution rely on these spaces for mental health, for getting through 4 years. So I also just think we're going to make an inhospitable environment, and it's just, might as well do away with the ed department then,
Yeah, I mean, certainly the way they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion it's not at all sort of your experience, or my experience. Like, you're talking about people living together who are very, very different, and trying to allow that to happen in a way so that people can learn from each other and people can have a safe space. Like, that's not easy work to do. Like, people that are so different living in close quarters. And a lot of people would say there's a lot of value to that. Yeah, that stuff is done. I mean, the book banning, some of that stuff. I mean, it's hard to know, because sometimes with big bureaucracies, sometimes they don't move that quickly. But then when you have sort of the mindset of, I'm coming in with a wrecking ball,
right,
and then you have all three branches, and you just want to like completely shake things up. Yeah, I mean, I think we probably would be better to come back and examine this when we see what actually gets done versus, I mean, I think it makes sense to talk about, what are the things that they say they're going to do? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. The changes that they say are going to happen. So buyer beware, like nobody gets completely blindsided. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with FSEOG grants, because I have not seen a commitment to, under-resourced families that way. And I think it's seen, and, it's just not, I mean, there's a lot of talk of how can we balance the budget, and we can't touch entitlements, and we're not going to touch the military. And, but yet at the same time, we have to get it down. So what are the things that we can slash?
Right.
And then I could really see that being one of the things that people slash, which is federal need-based aid to make college affordable.
Right.
So we'll just have to see, Julia. I think we need to get off this. So you're looking sad over there. I think we should end this. I think we should end this conversation now.
Yes. Well, I thank you, Mark, and also thank you for a little more. Not that it was hopeful, but I appreciate your pragmatic approach to some of these things. It does help me calm down a little bit.
Well, you know what? Sometimes what happens is people have an idea and they think it sounds good, but they don't think through all the attendant consequences that happen, like putting people out of jobs and how it impacts people. And I don't think it's always that easy to just, with like razor-like precision, think that, well, I'll target blue states.
Right.
Without some things reverberating back. And even if you have President-elect is very transactional. You're for him, he's for you, kind of thing. So he's proven that in his first regime, right? He wanted to, even things like hurricane relief funding and things like that, he tends to be like, well, it's your state for me, kind of thing. So even if you want to do things that are really geared toward what you think are not your voter, some of these things, I think the cross currents of them are such where they're, I'll give you another example without getting off on a tangent. Mass deportations. So I expect a lot of blowback from the business community that said, some of the people working are people we can't find employment for. All you're going to do is drive up our costs of our businesses, because we can't get labor unless we pay at a higher rate, and then people aren't going to like that. They're not going to like seeing their restaurants close or whatever. And so I'm not saying nothing's going to happen, but I think sometimes self interest ends up being a factor that can temper some campaign promises. But look, I'm not here to be a soothsayer. We'll look at it, see what happens when that. I think you look skeptical about that one too, Julia. Yeah, yeah. Well, the scary part are some of the people that are getting appointed, but we won't.
I can't. I know.
Yeah. Let's get off this
oh
topic.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Friends, after Julie and I finished recording, I started to do more research on mass deportations, and I came across an article in Forbes written by Edward Siegel entitled, How a Mass Deportation of Immigrants Would Impact Businesses. I'm just going to read a few excerpts from the article, which are so dire that I think they will serve as a restraint to some degree from the campaign promises being fulfilled. Okay, here's some excerpts. President-elect Donald Trump plans to follow through on his campaign pledge to address the immigration crisis by deporting millions of immigrants, would spawn a variety of crisis situations for companies and organizations, according to experts and observers. The ripple effects of mass deportation would include labor shortages in agriculture, construction, hospitality, and other industries, according to Usha Haley, the W. Frank Barton Distinguished Chair in International Business, a professor of management at the Barton School of Business at Wichita State University. Deporting millions of immigrants would also hurt the economy. By one estimate from an immigration policy group, GDP could shrink by 1.1 trillion to 1.7 trillion. A mass deportation would create an immediate crisis in the tech sector, where immigrant talent drives innovation, and that's according to Bethany Page, CEO of 2 technology companies. And she warned that via email. The deportation would also hamper the country's efforts to compete in key areas. In my role leading global IT teams, I've seen firsthand how diverse talent pools accelerate technological advancement and market competitiveness. The loss of immigrant workers would critically impact our ability to compete globally in emerging technologies like AI and robotics, she pointed out. The mass deportation of immigrants could put many business leaders in the hot seat. There will be demands for companies to speak out against mass deportation from an ethical, diversity, and race perspective that could impact corporate reputations. That's according to Al Arluk, who leads an equity and justice practice at APCO, which is a global advisory and advocacy firm. So anyway, that's some of the reasons why I think the bite will not be as big as the bark. So we'll see how it all plays out, and especially in the education sector. And if there's any more significant news on this topic, we'll bring it back in the future in the news.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, friends, if I seem a little hyper caffeinated on this, and Hillary maybe as well, this is my favorite question we have ever had, ever, on the podcast. And we've already had 290 SpeakPipe questions, and before that, we had tons that you wrote in. So if you're wondering what's got me so stoked, we'll play the question, and I'll let Hillary start it out.
Hi, Mark, and the whole Your College-Bound Kid team. My name is Tori, and I'm a current high school senior and avid listener. I'm a homeschooler, so I found your podcast this past summer when I was researching college admissions in hopes of navigating this process with as much data as possible. Since I'm basically my own counselor and the oldest of 4 sisters who will also eventually embark on their own college journeys, this podcast has been an immense resource. I just wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you so much for all the work you do to provide such quality information. Secondly, my question. Perhaps surprisingly, it doesn't have to do with my personal college admissions process, since I've learned from you all that there probably isn't enough context I could provide to help you craft a complete and niche answer to the specific challenges that I face due to my situation: classically educated, personal extracurriculars, military family, test score, etc. So instead, I'm choosing to ask about advice you have for a current high school student who is super intrigued by the prospect of one day working in college admissions. Listening to your podcast has made me realize that this career is something I might want to pursue. I was wondering if you had any tips for how to break into the field as someone who hasn't even attended college yet. Maybe some ways I could set myself up once I get there, or any qualities you think are important for a college counselor or admissions officer. What are some things you would have done differently from the outset if you knew this was going to be your career? For a tiny bit of personalized context, my dream job would be a mathematics professor, and I plan on double majoring in math and philosophy. Thanks so much.
Where do you want to go with this one, Hillary? There's a lot of places you can go.
Oh my gosh. As soon as I heard like the first half of Tori's question, my brain just started racing. I was so excited to hear it because I sort of was this kid when I was
Sure.
in high school. I just loved colleges. I loved everything about learning about colleges. And I wish that I had had Tori's foresight and known that like this is actually a thing you can do for a living, because I think it would have been really easy to see myself in that position. And I just didn't think of it that way. So listening to Tori, probably halfway through, I started thinking, "Ooh, gosh, we need to give her some advice on like what she should study." And I was thinking like it's got to be something where you can learn to solve hard problems, and where you can learn to deal with big data sets, and where you can understand human nature. And then she said that she's interested in math and philosophy, and I was like, she's already got it. Like she knows what she's doing. So I would definitely say like math and philosophy is great. There is no sort of required academic path for somebody who wants to do this job. I know like my favorite admission friend from another college, Luke, who's at Gettysburg, he studied Civil War history. I think we've got people in our office who studied like feminist and gender studies or theater. People who do theater do really well in admission. Karen, my boss, she studied psychology. I think Matt studied Spanish, like political science. It's all over the board, right? So you can study whatever you want, but if you want to really set yourself up well, I think understanding big data sets, being able to deal with a lot of data and to manipulate data really well is helpful. So math or economics or data science, not that you need to major in those things, but have some background in those and know how to manipulate data. I think that's really helpful. I think being able to read critically, think critically, to like kind of look at big problems and identify multiple different solutions and weigh different solutions, which is really what you're doing in philosophy, right? I think understanding human nature, so maybe some psychology classes, especially developmental psychology classes, understanding how the adolescent brain works and what kind of you can expect from an adolescent brain, I think is really helpful. Understanding family systems can be helpful. Being a really good public speaker. So whether that's theater or whether that's doing some maybe Model UN or mock trial or debate, those are all really helpful things for developing your public speaking skills, your ability to answer questions on the fly, to understand what someone is asking and get to the question behind the question. And also to be able to, I'm terrible about this, but when people ask me multi-part questions, I have to write down each part of the question. But if you have experience in debate, like you're going to be much better at remembering what each question was so that you can address all of those questions and understanding not just the actual question itself, but like what is the information that the person is looking for. And so being able to address that, I think, is really helpful. And then I think just like a natural curiosity, wanting to understand different places. I think my favorite part about being a territory rep is getting to fall in love with the places that I represent. So like I had never been to Maine before I became a territory rep from Maine. And I think that like my soul actually lives in Maine. And it's so fun to get to know these different places and to
Susan
explore.
is loving you right now.
Yes.
Susan has deep Maine roots.
To get to explore and to learn new things about people and places and to enjoy interacting with people, getting to know counselors. All of those things are really important parts of our job. And then the other thing that I would say is that, like, each office has roles that are sort of specialty roles, right? And so you kind of got to figure out, maybe not now, but at some point, like, are you more interested? Like, I do communications, right? I write a lot of emails. I have to think sort of broadly about how best to create a message that's going to land with students or that's going to land with parents. So that's one role. There's another role in data, right? Understanding systems, being able to do system analytics, being able to manage big data groups, but also being able to work with, like, our system with Slate and knowing how to work with, IT kind of stuff. And then there are people who do outreach and access and who are really great at communicating with students who come from underrepresented backgrounds and first gen students. And there are people who do lots of event planning, and there are people who think about daily visits. So all of these different roles exist within an admission office. And in most offices, you're going to have to do dual roles, right? You're going to have to do something like communication or outreach and access or data, and also be a territory rep. So finding something that you're good at and that you enjoy beyond the territory rep part of it is really important. And then the last thing that I would say is working in your admission office, wherever you end up in college, is really critical. It is very, very hard to get a job in admission if you don't have prior experience in admission. And so having some experience as an admission ambassador at your college is, I think, crucial to getting your first job in admission. They will say on the job descriptions that they require experience in higher ed, but really they're going to favor someone with admission experience. So having had a role as a student will be really helpful, whether that's as an admission ambassador or an intern in the office or some other role. But you should really prioritize, when you go to look for a job as a student, working in the admission office. What do you think, Mark? What did I miss?
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. And I appreciate just the detail that you went through all the different skill sets and things. That was really, really awesome. I really want to emphasize, like, you can be all kinds of different college majors. That's one of the things that's nice. You really can be all kinds of different college majors. Sales experience isn't necessary, but it's incredibly helpful because sales and recruitment have a lot in common, and interacting with people and learning how to practice persuasion and share messages. That can be an incredible background. I want to focus a lot more on where you finished up, though, Hillary, because I think that's a question a lot of people will have, which is what's the process of getting the job?
Yeah.
I think, you were really thorough on skill sets that are really helpful to come in with it. And the most natural one is the one that you said. You start out as a tour guide. You start out as a tour guide and you just do a bang up job there, being responsible. If you're doing a great job, you'll tend to get more responsibilities. Maybe you become a head tour guide. Maybe you start getting to the point where you're a panelist on admitted student visit programs and open houses and things like that.
Yep.
And then some schools have formal programs like admission fellows programs like that, it varies from school to school. And some people do student interviews. Some people even sit in admissions processes at times. It depends on the school, like how formally they've built out that program. But that background is how so many people get jobs.
Yep.
They get jobs that way. They'll get the job at their institution because the admission office knows this person now. They've seen them. Yep. They've basically been interning for the job and they know what they're about. And that's what you see a lot of people, the 22 and 23-year-old admission officer that starts out as a tour guide. Like, that's a natural path. And one of my students I worked with, it's going all the way back to, I recruited her as a student at boarding school. I was her advisor for 4 years. She went to Davidson College. And she went all the way up in the tour guide program and, had a high level position. And then she knew she wanted to go to law school, but she wasn't ready to do it right away. So she first looked to Davidson, and Davidson didn't have any openings at the time. But
Chris Gruber
thought the world of her, and they put the word out to all their peer group.
Yep.
And so she ended up working at Haverford School where Julia worked.
Yeah.
But that's because she had done that higher level senior
Yeah,
fellow
I was
stuff and
just
all
going to
that stuff.
say
Hmm.
that. Like, I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
admission circles are so tight knit that if you were to work here at CC for a few years and then you told us in the office, like, hey, I'm really interested in continuing on and doing this for a living, we know where there are openings and we're going to be able to help plug you in somewhere. The other thing I would say is that there are some schools, like Davidson is one, right, who have a college advising corps program,
Yeah.
where they send out their former admission ambassadors to go work in schools that are underfunded, under resourced as college advisors there, and that can also be a path back into working in admission. Like, I know one of the admission officers, Kyle at Davidson right now, took that path where he went to Davidson and then he joined the college advising corps and then came back to Davidson, and he moved up really quickly. I mean, he's young, but he is pretty high up in their office because he had lots of really great experience. So that can be a way to get some experience on both sides of the desk also.
When I was a director of college counseling at KIPP, I met with a young lady in her 20s. She graduated from college and she was in teaching. And then she was like, I want to do what you do. How do I do what you do? And so I told her, well, if you can get admissions experience, it's going to make you so much better as a counselor. So, make a long story short, she reached out to me maybe a year and a half later. She had got an admissions job at Agnes Scott. Now we know those are not easy to get.
Yeah.
The other thing, and so she did it. She was in Agnes Scott for admissions there for a while, and then she flipped over. We call it flipping to the other side of the deck. She flipped over to the counseling side. The other thing you can do, and Hillary, you can speak to this, and I can speak to this, is well, this is a young person asking. If I was answering this for somebody a little older, like if you can volunteer as much as possible. I know that my second admission opportunity that I got in Pennsylvania, that came a lot from me being an active volunteer and doing all kinds of, I was doing like almost doing the work of an admissions person and not being paid.
Yeah.
And Hillary, I know that was partly your path into you want to speak a little bit about how you broke into it? I mean, this doesn't
Yeah.
relate so much to Tori, but I also know that we could have listeners out here who are like, well, I can't go back and be a tour guide. And they might be interested in how we would give them advice. And this is a possible way to break in. It's difficult, but it's at least a pathway. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you did?
I think I was just really lucky, actually. So I had wanted to move into
Lucky and
admission.
talented. Lucky and talented.
Mostly lucky. I think I had wanted to move into admission for a while. I had been teaching at University of Colorado Springs as an adjunct for a long time, and I applied for an admission role there and didn't get it. And then I applied for a couple roles at CC that I didn't get, and I think this is why I say, like, they'll say that you need higher ed experience, but actually you need admission experience. And I had lots of higher ed experience, and I felt really good about my time in the classroom with students. I felt like I knew students really well. I had done a lot of work after I left higher ed, I'd done a lot of work in comms and in fundraising. So I sort of understood territory management from a fundraising perspective. But I didn't have the exact experience that they wanted. And then a temporary position opened up. And so my original supervisor at CC, Megan, was leaving for family leave. She was pregnant and they needed somebody to fill in for her while she was gone. And I applied for that role and I was overqualified. I was overqualified probably for everything that I applied for, which I think was part of the problem, but I was overqualified for that role. But they were like, well, it's just temporary, so it doesn't matter. And then once I got there and I actually got my foot in the door, it was easy because they could see that I had skills that were transferable skills and that I was going to be good at my job. But I think being willing to take a role that is sort of, I'm going to do air quotes here, beneath you is important, but equally as important is explaining in your cover letter and or in your interview why you want to do that, right? And that you're trying to make a transition into something different. And I think one of the things that I've heard from folks who are higher up than I am in the admission world is that people don't realize how hard this job is. And so we see people trying to make a, transition into admission thinking this is going to be easier than what I'm doing right now, especially if they're coming from a faculty role or even from a teaching role. And I think it is easier than being a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, but it's a lot of hours, right? And I think that one thing that you have to do on the sort of front end in your cover letter is to acknowledge, I understand that this is going to be a lot of work, and I understand that this is hard work, and I don't know how you say this in the right way, but like, I'm not doing this because I'm looking for something easy. I'm doing this because I really care about it. And I think that can help maybe allay some of the fears. The other thing that I would say is to just see if you can get an informational interview with an office that's near you and just get to know the director or someone who would be in a position to hire at that office so that they can just get to know you. That was one thing that Karen said to me after she hired me was like, we should really just start doing informational interviews with like former teachers and to be able to see like, is this person, do they really have what it takes are they here because they care about it, and how much do they really know about admission already versus like they're just looking for something that's quote unquote easy or easier than what they've been doing. So those are a couple of the things that I've seen coming in sort of from the outside. I'm now in my 4th year of admission work, and I really love it, but it was hard to break into. And it would have been, if I had done if I had known that volunteer opportunities existed, like what was the organization that you had on, Mark, for interviews that takes volunteers? I can't remember right now.
Scholar Match?
Yeah, Scholar Match. Scholar Match or Mosaic, I think, is one that you can do when you're in college. If I had had that kind of experience on my resume, it would have been 1,000 times easier. And that is not a high bar to get into one of those organizations, right? Because they just need people who are willing to work with kids. So I think there are some easier ways than the approach that I took, but I've given you hopefully some insight into kind of what I might have done differently.
No, Hillary's right. Going through the CBO, community-based organization and getting actively involved there is good experience. I totally agree with Hillary. They say higher ed, but they really want admissions experience. Yeah. They're not gonna see necessarily being a teacher somewhere as a parallel skill set compared to all the skills you need to do here. One reason why this question excited me so much is this is literally my favorite question ever, and I'm not exaggerating. Is because I think admissions is so incredibly rewarding, incredibly fulfilling, and it is not something anybody ever says to me when I'm talking to them as a 17 or 18-year-old that this is what I want to do. It just doesn't happen. And I've actually had people that I've talked to about it. I'm like, your skill set is so amazing for admissions. I think you would love it. Yeah. And, and I get that glazed eye look, and sometimes parents are like, that's not going to pay, so, you get that as well. But even if the work is hard, I think it's some of the most fulfilling work.
Yeah, definitely.
And a lot of people who do it, they love it and just wouldn't want to do anything else. And so I think it can be such a rewarding career. And even financially, it doesn't have to be low pay the whole time. Like, there are opportunities that people get that you're not going to get this in five years into it, but it can lead to different pathways where people can, make a decent living.
Yeah, and you can leave the college side too, not necessarily to go to the other side of the desk, but to go work for the College Board or EAB or Slate. Like, there are a lot
of companies. Those people pay a lot. Those are very high paying jobs.
Yeah, especially if you learn the data side and you can go work for a place like Slate or one of the other partner organizations that we work with. There are lots of those jobs that end up being virtual. They have much better hours than what I have. They don't involve a lot of travel. Like, they're sort of, compared to what I'm doing now, cushy and pay better. If you get to a point where you're like, this doesn't work for my family or for me anymore to have this kind of schedule, there are other options for sure.
And Tori, I would agree 100% with what Hillary said there. And Tori, I'll tell you, just the same way that you communicate it on your question this sounds like fun. I really want to do that. You just need to get in front of like the leadership at whatever school you end up going to and tell them that. And you communicate that level of passion. And especially if they see that you're in it to help people, they'll find a place for you starting out, maybe as a tour guide, maybe in a volunteer capacity, and you do a bang up job, and it will lead to more opportunities. Because the one other thing that is good is while it's hard to break in, like Hillary said, once you've broken in, there's so many opportunities because there can be a fair amount of turnover.
Yes. There's a ton of turnover.
Yeah, there's a ton of turnover. And there's a lot of schools out there, 2,275 four-year bachelor accredited schools, right? So, oh, you know what? I would have another piece of advice. And this is different from what I did, because I started out in college admissions in the early 90s at a school that was really just not a competitive school. And if you can work at a place that does holistic admissions, it's really going to teach you how admissions works so much more than if it's just a place that's just looking at a transcript and admitting just off that. There's so many things you're not going to understand about how everything works if you're at a place that does admissions that way. It's really helpful to be able to understand things like, just the role extracurriculars play, the role of reading plays, the role institutional priorities play, stuff like Hillary's talking about, territory management, events, like being in a more competitive place that does holistic admissions. Like I learned on my admission stuff doing boarding school admissions and doing college counseling, the combination of both. I learned way more than I did in my college admissions job because it wasn't a competitive job. It wasn't competitive, so I wasn't learning all the nuances that you learn in a competitive situation. And I know that if I was an admission officer and I was in a hiring capacity and I was looking for someone, and if I was at a school that did holistic admissions and someone was coming from a place that they had done admissions, but they hadn't done it that way, I wouldn't see that as the qualifications that I would want, actually, because I really wouldn't feel like they would understand all the nuances of the job.
There's certainly a lot more training that has to happen. Like we definitely hire folks who come from schools that do admission by the numbers. But you can tell that the first year of reading and the first year of like understanding sort of the bigger picture strategy, talking about strategy is very different from that for them. And it takes some getting used to, but still having that admission experience on your resume is better than not having any. I was going to also say, like, for getting a job as a student, I don't know, I would imagine this is probably pretty similar in other offices, but we tend to hire first year students in the spring of their first year. That's when you'll see the job postings in the internal, job database at CC. So kind of keep your eyes peeled your first year of college for those postings to come up. And then we also hire not just for admission ambassadors, but also for interns in our office. So we're hiring a communications intern right now. We have 2 or 3 interns who work just with outreach and access. So those are also ways to get in and have sort of a different job rather than answering the phones. Like you might be putting together social media posts or something a little bit different in your first year working in the office. But if you come in and tell the hiring manager, like, this is what I want to do for a living, and you are as articulate as you sounded in the, message that you left us, then you're not going to have a problem getting hired.
Yeah, like the same way that Hillary and I were like deeply moved by your message. Mm-hmm. That's how I see other admissions people, because they know like this is something people stumble on.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, this is my plan. And the thought that someone might almost feel like a calling to the work at a young age, that's going to be really impressive. So, yep. Tori, you need to send another SpeakPipe follow-up message with us when you get to your college. Let us know if you're getting actively involved through volunteer opportunities in the admission office.
Yeah,
and
we're
check
excited
in with
to
us
hear more.
from time to time. Because if you end up as an admission officer, I might want to have you on the podcast. I'm not kidding. To talk about it.
And I would say, keep listening to the podcast, right? Or to
yes.
other podcasts, because this, like, when I came into my role, I knew more than people who had been working in admission for 2 or 3 years because I'd listened to Mark I listened to every single episode. Like, this is really, really good professional development. To hear the kinds of topics that Mark talks about, or if you're listening to any of the other college podcasts out there, there's just a lot of information. And that's impressive when you come in with that knowledge already.
That's a really good point. Like that someone could have a base of knowledge of things that could make them a lot more impressive candidate. Even
it's hard to communicate that in a cover letter, but I think
yes.
Once you get an interview, then that's your sort of opportunity to shine.
Yeah. Awesome. This is a fun conversation, Hillary.
Yeah, for sure.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we've reached the final segment of my interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford on Glimpse Video. And in this segment, Terry and Gloria continue to share some tips for students so they can produce Glimpse videos that will resonate with the admissions offices. Gloria and Terry and I have a great conversation about what it means to be gimmicky. Gloria and Terry share a great to-do list, and they share a few things that you do not want to do when it comes to your Glimpse videos. Terry talks about some kids have a presence that just is compelling for any adult that sees the video, and how they hear this over and over again from admission officers. Gloria talks about playing music in the background and playing a musical instrument, and she gives her opinion on whether this is advisable. Gloria and Terry have a great conversation about advice for parents. And Gloria says she's applying this herself as she's a parent. And Gloria closes by answering a SpeakPipe question that a listener sent in about Glimpse that our roundtable answered, but I thought I'd have her answer it because she's the expert. And how would she respond to our listeners? So we play a question that you may recognize, and we get Gloria's response. Hope you guys enjoyed what was a really fun interview for me to do with Gloria and Terry Crawford on Glimpse Video. Would you recommend, and this is all counselors, because we have CBO counselors, we have public and independent school all listening. Would you also say like no poems? Like a lot of times students want to do poems. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it can't look scripted. Like it can't look contrived. It can't look scripted.
Sure.
I don't want to say that all poems are bad. Like that's something I'm very hesitant to say, because I can imagine, Amanda Gorman coming and being very compelling,
Right. In fact, there was one poem that brought people to tears. So there isn't, there's no, just like everything else, there's no formula to this. But the reason why that poem was so compelling is because it was personal, and like she didn't just recite the poem. She had, color around it. Like, I wrote this poem, and then, so again, it's contextual. Everything is contextual. So I don't want to say no reciting of poems, but you have
but
to.
You're really emphasizing the natural, we know the difference between
it's something
reading.
Really meaningful to you and really important to you, and that's why you're sharing it.
Any other tips?
Yeah, the second thing is, don't talk about the school. Like, maybe you're doing it for ED, and the temptation is to say, like, I love your school because of these reasons. You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Like, it is very, like, you are already sending it as part of your ED application. The reason the admissions officers have made this part of their application is because they want to get to know you. And that is really, really important. Don't wear the shirt of the school you're applying to. Don't have it behind you.
Yeah.
For many of these students too, we can all be very realistic here. They're actually not going to be successful with their ED application. And then you
have to do a whole new video.
What's that?
Would they have to do a whole new video if that happened?
So they can. After ED, they do have the chance to they can redo it if they want to. That's just part of it. I mean,
but that's a great tip. I'm having to give students that tip a lot. A lot of times a school will ask something. It's not a question about it's not a why question. It's just tell me an extracurricular activity you're really excited about. And then the student wants to take a whole paragraph on like pledging their allegiance to their ED school. And I'm like, this isn't the place for that. So this is just your video version of what I have to do in writing a lot of times. Yeah.
Well, and in fact, I mean, it actually ends up shooting them in the foot because a lot of people actually sound very similar when they talk about an institution, actually, right? Because they're maybe looking at core values on the website and trying to say, like, that's why, or they're talking about a certain tradition at this school. And like, you're just hearing about all of Duke's traditions,
Sure.
but we're not actually learning anything about the students. So I would shy away from kind of being like, go cats or whatever the mascot is, and just talk about yourself. And the final thing I would say, tip wise, like, don't be gimmicky. I think like a lot of people try to look at YouTube videos and see what else people are doing, and then they just kind of follow a trend. And the problem is, like, you don't realize that admissions officers are looking at 1,000 of these or more.
Yeah.
And if everyone's doing a room tour or everyone's doing then all of a sudden it all blurs again, right? So really just no need to be like, what's the trend? What's the gimmick? What's the thing that will just think about there's a curious adult on the other side of this screen who wants to know who I am, and then tell that story.
Okay, Gloria, can you give examples of things that feel gimmicky? I think for some people, they'll hear that and they're like, I hear you, but I'm not sure what that means. Give any examples to mind of stuff that felt gimmicky?
I don't even want to go there.
Words that three words that describe me.
Yeah, I don't like the 3 words that describe me. I don't feel like they're genuine. Or it's not that they're not genuine. It's just not. There are certain phrases that come at the very beginning of a video that make you kind of disengage. And so I would shy away from anything too intro-y.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because everything you're talking about, students do this in writing too.
Right, exactly.
I call it the big wind-up. I say, we don't need the big wind-up, and I know you're trained to do that, the big wind-up, and then they do the cliche conclusion.
Right. Yeah. And I saw, like recently some people trying to do kind of like a talk show hosty sort of play. It can work for a certain student. And they like anything can be artfully done, right?
Sure.
But
that's why this is difficult, right? Because you can't.
Right.
You want to give tips, but you can't sort of give hard and fast rules. Sort of a lot of times, because they can.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why my only hard and fast. Yeah, my only hard and fast rule is like, do not memorize anything. Do not read anything. It's not an additional supplemental essay. Like, that's what it comes across when somebody's reading. Oh, and I will say that there have been students who've been trying to shove their own edited video into this Glimpse platform by holding their phone to their webcam. And it is terrible. It is like, I'm like, do not do that.
I see, because they wanted to do the whole edited thing. Your platform won't allow it, so they just do their own thing, and then they're like, I'll circumvent these policies.
Right. And I will just say that is just a turnoff, because one, it's like, you didn't follow the instructions on my website, but also it's distracting. And I think that's what kids sometimes forget. Like, we are in a world where there's a lot of stimulation, so you feel like you got to have the little special effects, you have to have the little stickers that are coming up, you have to have like a little slide or a photo, and we're actually kind of overstimulated that sometimes when all of that is in a video, you're just like, I can't. And especially if an admissions officer is listening in the background and they're looking at other pieces of your application, they're going to miss all of those things anyway. And so why waste time and spend so much time with the editing process when, in fact, all you want to do is make sure that you're telling a compelling story in as little as 60 seconds, 90 seconds. I mean, you can talk about a lot in that time frame, and you don't need to necessarily have all this other stuff happening in the screen.
Mark, you mentioned how, and of course we're mentioning here how it still is evolving. How students use it is very interesting, and it's hard to kind of give blanket, advice on what the content of these should be, other than just kind of a few key points. On some level, that's the world that we're in, and that we're in the world of selective admissions, where each school has their own discretion with how to use materials that they receive. They have their own priorities. Sometimes those priorities and the way that they exercise their discretion, the admissions offices don't even know that until they get the applications. So it's a little bit of it's not really worthwhile to spend lots of time trying to kind of unpack exactly what the motive of a particular admissions officer might be. But one of the things that I do want to say, which is very interesting, and we're not able to quantify this the way that we might like. Maybe at some point we'll figure out a way to do it. But there is something about a compelling student that adults seem to all agree on. In other words, it is like when you see it, you know it. And I want to encourage anyone listening to this that's advising students is that you can, you are the adult in the room. Like, you're the one that it knows the adult world, that understands how a 17-year-old can strike that balance of still being a 17-year-old, but being a little bit more of a their sophisticated self in a way that's compelling to an adult decision maker. And there's one of our favorite examples that we of course will get permission from students to use examples from time to time, and Gloria will play this example. And there have been times in a room where maybe people are very suspicious of this, or they don't like it. They think it's very they're a little bit antagonistic towards it. But then they'll start to hear this kid talk about himself, and he is unbelievably endearing. And if we were to describe what he talks about, you might just think like, oh, that's just a normal, there's nothing particularly flashy or special about that at all. But then you see the video and the way that this student is able to come across and just has that presence,
authenticity,
or that authenticity that where every adult in the room, they just start to be like, that is impressive and that is compelling. And so I do want to empower anyone who's listening to this that on some level you get to just tell a student, this is good. And a lot of times you're going to be actually encouraging a student where a student doesn't know that they're compelling, but because you're the one that is the participant in the adult world and has the years of experience, you're able to really reassure them and to a large extent kind of ease their transition from being a 17-year-old true kid to a young adult.
What about music in the background? Is that a no-no, or is that it depends?
I think it depends. More often than not, it's a distraction. But I mean, there have been a number of videos where it's artfully done. And but I think more often than not, it's a little bit of a distraction. And and even playing a musical instrument, it is not an audition. So just keep in mind that this is not an audition. So you don't need to and if you want to take 20 seconds of your 90 seconds to maybe play a little bit, that's great, but you don't need to spend the whole 90 seconds playing a whole piece. Again, the motivation is probably more important, right? Like to sit by your piano, just sit by your guitar and talk about the meaning of that is much more compelling than playing the song. It's like when people want to send their research abstracts, and I'm like, the admissions officers are not professors other than Caltech.
Sure. Yeah,
but,
Caltech.
Right.
Yeah.
But most admissions officers probably don't understand, this research abstract that you want to try to shove into your application.
Or have the time to read it either.
Yeah, but they certainly would appreciate kind of knowing about the process where you tried something and it kept failing, you kept trying, and then you sought out advice from a professor, or you work through the kinks, and that kind of stuff is actually much more compelling than reading your research abstract. So I think that's a good illustration of there are a lot of things you could talk about, and some of them are not necessary to understanding who you are as a person, and others are going to be much more compelling, and you just want to kind of find that story. Any parents on this call or on listening to this webinar they have them send it to another trusted adult, because
Good advice. Yeah.
you will either be overcritical or you will be like, my kid is amazing, and of course this is compelling.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
actually great advice. Yes.
so I would say, have another trusted adult that has a little bit of distance
Mm-hmm.
to watch it and say, oh, this is great, I learned something new about you, or oh, this is exactly, you're illuminating your authenticity in a way that is compelling to any person. I think I would just lean into that a little, because I am a parent in the process and way too close. And
Mm-hmm.
I find myself, having to bite my tongue and just be like, okay, we're not going to either over criticize or over praise what the situation is.
Excellent. So the last question is just, is there anything that we haven't shared that you would like to share about Glimpse?
Rule number one of our interviews, of the interviews we do with international students, is that we always ask this question at the end, and we always say, is there anything else you would like to share? And we always tell students, make sure you have a good response if someone asks if there's anything else that you would like to share. And I am right now violating our own advice that we give, because I don't know what else we would talk about.
So all that
This has
says,
been
Terry,
fantastic.
is that I'm a chatterbox and I'm
No, what it
exhaustive
means
and
is that
comprehensive.
you're an excellent interviewer and you covered so many topics.
Well, this has been fun. It's great to see you guys again. I'm really excited about what you're doing. It's really fun for me to see it take off, not only because I personally like you two as a couple, but which is true, but I really do believe in what you're doing. And it's just exciting for me to see it take off. And I wait for next year. It's coming. It's coming. Get
We're
your tech
preparing for
people ready. Get your tech
it.
people ready. But thank you
Well,
so
if
much.
you're hesitating and you're a senior right now, or you're a parent of a senior right now, I would say it. You should try. You should just try it. Like,
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, you don't have to do anything, send it anywhere, pay any money, to just try. And it's such a good exercise to be doing. I think it'll help you in the application process as a whole, because you will realize what parts of you have maybe not been expressed in your application, and may either change up how you're writing your essays, or make you feel compelled, you know what, I'm sending this video, because it adds to the application. So don't hesitate to try it. And if you have any questions, you can reach us anywhere. We're very easily found on our website. And I'm sure, Mark, you can pass along people our way as well.
Yeah, I'm going to do something which I wish I should have done ahead of time, but I thought of it later. So we have students and parents send in verbal questions. We use speakpipe.com as a platform. We have a subscription there. And we had one recently on Glimpse, which we have a roundtable, and our roundtable answered it. But what I want to do is send it to you as an audio file. And then you can actually just go to speakpipe.com and hit the record. And I'd
Okay.
love to get your answer to it. And then I'll have our sound engineer splice it into this. And so I'd love to
Awesome.
get your answer, how you guys would have answered the Glimpse question. So that's the
Okay.
one last thing. I'll send that to you later today.
Hi, Mark. I'm a mom in New England. I really love your show. I have a question about video responses that some colleges are asking for now. I've seen some schools like Brown and Bowdoin and Swarthmore have this option, but I'm pretty sure there must be other schools doing this now as well. The websites often say they are optional video responses, but I guess I'm wondering, is optional really optional? Do you have any advice about whether to submit a video or not? For example, what should a student consider in deciding whether to do a video? Finally, do you recommend any resources to students who plan to do this? Thank you so much for your advice and for your podcast.
I think the way to think about the word optional is that admissions officers have kind of a challenge to have a process, yet remove barriers for people applying, right? They want the application. So while they would like to have more information from everyone, they also realize that if they put too many requirements on an application, people would just not apply. So I think the way to think about it more is that an optional component is just additional information, is an opportunity for you to provide admissions officers some additional information that could help them make a decision. And I like to describe the admissions process a little bit like advocacy, right? Your reader is actually someone that you hope to be your advocate in the process. And so they're going to read your file, and hopefully they'll be able to bring you to committee and recommend you as a candidate. So in that way, any additional evidence that they can bring to the table is good. So again, if the student feels like I've said everything I want to say in my application, then there is no need to provide a glimpse video. But I think that there are constraints in the current application as it is. And so I would say that a glimpse video could be a great opportunity to add a piece of information that isn't already covered in the application. And that would be my advice on how to approach the video. It does not need to be packaged. It does not need to be something really sophisticated even. It can just be a meaningful piece of the student's experience that wasn't necessarily shared in the application. Or maybe it was referenced. For example, it might be something in the extracurriculars, but you only had 150 characters to explain it. And so if there was something that you wanted to go more in depth about, the glimpse video would be an opportunity to add that voice and that experience and context. As for other advice and resources, we do have on our FAQs, initialview.com/glimpse/FAQs, a link for potential topics to talk about. We definitely utilize that as a way for you to consider topics in case you are just bumping up against, I don't know what to talk about, but it also isn't meant to constrain you at all because you have that 60 to 90 seconds is yours and you are able to use it however you would like. We are always available to answer questions. If you want to email glimpse@initialview.com, we can give some advice and recommendations and tips based on what we've seen throughout our time trying this out. But at the end of the day, we hope that students realize that it's just an opportunity to humanize the admissions process, to help an admission officer imagine you on campus, imagine you as a roommate, imagine you in office hours, and imagine you in the dining hall. This is just a way for college admissions officers to feel great about the community that they're building.
Thank you guys so much for everything. And, I'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Mark.
My pleasure.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, we've reached part 5 of 5 in my interview with Fabrizio Delosio. And in part 5, Fabrizio shares what some of the institutional priorities are at UTK. Fabrizio shares what percentage of students stay in state after graduation. Fabrizio talks about the joint partnership they have with Arizona State University Online. Fabrizio talks about the renewed emphasis they are putting on transfer students and on alternative pathways to get to the Knoxville campus. Fabrizio talks about their partnership with Verto. Fabrizio talks about what UTK needs to work on to become an even better school. Fabrizio shares who their biggest overlap schools are, and he shares whether this has changed in the last 7 years. Fabrizio talks about how the role of major has changed now that they are more selective. Fabrizio goes on the hot seat in our lightning round, and then I thought of a couple more questions. So Fabrizio gives families advice on what to do if they have a question about the SAR, the SRAR. And Fabrizio tells us why the SAR creates what he calls a ton of efficiencies. Hope you enjoy the final segment of what was a fantastic interview I did with Fabrizio Delosio of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Talk about other institutional priorities. What are some other institutional priorities? And I fully understand that some institutional priorities are held close to the vest and not appropriate for a podcast like this, but there's also others that people can share.
Yeah. Well, we kind of talked about what it means to be a Tennessee volunteer. We want to make sure that that experience not only happens as part of our admissions process, but cascades across campus in every interaction a student has here, their engagement. They walk away feeling they had this amazing experience. And I think we do that really well, but it's an institutional priority to continue to elevate it. Really important. In fact, our chancellor walks around campus, she sees a tour, she stops, talks to the tour, she talks to students, and she'll ask current students, hey, seniors particularly, what's your volunteer experience? Tell me what your experience is. And that's really important because that is a key strategy to making sure our students are successful. They feel like they matter and belong. They're having an impact. And when they leave here, they're going to be amazing alums. So that's really important. I would also say that about 30 to, depending on the major, 30 to 40% of our out-of-state students stay in state after they graduate. And you mentioned Nashville and people moving to the state, like that's an economic driver. And so our priority is to make sure that if a student that came to be educated here graduates, that they see opportunities within the state because it helps the state.
You know, I have two daughters, Fabrizio, 28 and 25, and one went to Davidson College, outside of Charlotte. The other did her master's at North Carolina State. Where do they both live right now? They're both in North Carolina.
Well, there you go. Right.
I mean, I think it's smart for colleges to realize, that, gee, when we can attract certain talent, there's a decent chance they'll stay here.
Well, and look at nursing, right? Like there's a national nursing shortage, right? We have a phenomenal college of nursing, right? Like let's make sure more nurses stay in state, right? Because that helps the state, that helps Tennesseans. So, hey, another thing I'll mention is we've launched and are enhancing and growing this program. We have a partnership with ASU around online.
Oh, how does that work? I know ASU's doing a lot of stuff with Global Online. How does that work with you guys? What does that look like, the partnership?
Yeah, so they're definitely leaders in this space and putting out high quality programs in online, and not just taking what they did in the classroom and moving it to Zoom, but like rethinking the pedagogy from the beginning to the end. And so they're kind of our consultants, if you will, right? We are having some classes that we teach online. They have classes they teach online. A student at ASU will be able to take our online classes.
Oh.
And vice versa. So I think of it as like code sharing for Delta.
So it's almost like a reciprocity thing.
Yep. And they're taking it as native credit. So it's counting as native credit for the school they're enrolled at. And this currently right now for us is focused on transfer students. Now, who knows where it'll go in the future, but we think transfers are a population that we can be doing more with in online, but also transfers that are residents that are living in Knoxville in brick and mortar classrooms. And so you're going to see, I think your listeners are going to see more of an emphasis of us being in communities talking about transferring. Also, we have pathways. So as we've grown enrollment and we've had to have a smaller admit rate, we've created pathways. So if you don't get in as a first year student right off the bat, you could be offered an opportunity to study at another UT campus for a year and then transfer in with a kind of a guarantee. You could do a program where you study abroad in Florence, Italy, Seville, Spain, Prague, or London. And I was just in Seville, Spain to meet with these kids that are in this program, have an amazing program, and then come here in the spring in a guaranteed model.
Is that similar? Like I know William and Mary has a program with Seville. Is it similar?
It's I think the same with Verdo Education. We partner with them. Because we know maybe you don't want to go to community college for whatever the reason, right? Like this might be something that's more attractive. And it's great for the university because we talk about being a vol and a volunteer and what it means. Having someone that is educated and had that worldly experience and then being able to bring it back to a campus makes our community even stronger. And then just growing our academic programs, making sure that we have programs that are legitimately helping the state, that fill voids, like we talked about AI, like these new areas, making sure we support those and we're leaning in and our programs are relevant. I think those are probably a few.
That's great. What does UTK need to work on to become an even better school?
So we've made progress here. So as a larger institution, we're at 30, 35, 36,000 students with graduate, maybe a little bit more. Students come here sometimes and they're not aware of all the support and resources they have, right? They're almost overwhelmed. They say, man, there's so much I could do if I need help with this or have this question. I just don't know where to go. So, we've done things there, but we could be better, right? We have a Vol Success team that our student success program has put on, where they have 5 people they could turn to at any point in time, an advisor, someone in one stop, a student that's assigned to them. And so that person can help them figure out, you have this question or you need help here. They can steer them in the right direction. But we want to make sure we're providing more of that concierge service, especially to first year students and sophomores, because academically, that's when students are at the biggest risk. And I think as a public flagship, and I would argue many public flagships probably just need to be more nimble, right? Need to see what the community needs, see what our students need, look at new programs, and be nimble enough to innovate and stand up new colleges or stand up new programs or hire staff in a certain area because we see this as a priority or a need. We've got amazing leadership from our chancellor all the way down. And we're doing that, but there's always opportunities to be better at it.
Awesome. Well, we're about to transition to our lightning round, our lighthearted, we call it the hot seat lightning round. But before we do, is there anything that you haven't said about UTK that you want to say on any topic?
Yeah, I would say, and again, I said this earlier, I say I'm a little biased, right? But this is a special place. We're not an elephant. We're not a rooster. We're not a cat, right? We're volunteers. It means something. It's a verb and a noun. And so for students that want to have an impact, they want to be in a place where they're challenged academically, but they're able to have this amazing experience outside the classroom and then go back into their communities. And they're either in-state Tennesseans or they're out-of-state students. I would say, come out, give us a look. We're trying to do everything we can to best support students. And I feel like we're doing a pretty awesome job at it.
Well, I think going from 17,000 to 60,000 apps in 7 years speaks for itself. I do have one last question I thought about on the admission side. Who are your biggest out-of-state overlaps? And have you seen any change in that in your 7 years?
Yeah, we have. So I would say kind of the top 3 or 4, not necessarily in this order, but South Carolina, Georgia, Clemson, Auburn, Alabama a bit. They've kind of moved down a little bit in our overlap. At one point, I think Alabama was in the top 1 or top 2 out of state, but that's changed a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I keep thinking of things I meant to ask. What role does major play in admit rate? I meant to ask you that as well.
Yeah. So back when we had a higher admit rate, major really, for the most part, with the exception of 3 programs, really didn't play a role. However, now that we're seeing the volume of applications and the interest and the competitiveness, major does play a role in the number of students we can admit. As a result, has a role in the percent in terms of admitted.
So, you have places like, Illinois or Urbana-Champaign where literally there's a different admit rate for every single major, right? And then you have a lot of schools, well, there's a couple competitive programs. If you're talking to UMass Amherst, they're going to highlight nursing, business, engineering, comp sci, where there's, for you, is it down to the program, individual program, or is it just a few that are, we've already talked about nursing, so that's already established, right? That's a super low admit rate. Is it like business, nursing, engineering, where you see sort of the much more competitive programs and everything else is kind of all fairly similar?
Yeah, there's more than a handful. Business, engineering, nursing, architecture. We didn't talk about architecture. That's a great program.
Yeah.
Also, there it needs to be very small.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, at some level, it depends on the year too, right?
Sure.
Like we're also in this place now where we've grown so quickly that we don't know necessarily what it's going to be like next year. So today I'm saying there's 4 or 5 or 6.
Sure.
Next year there could be 10,
Yeah.
or not, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's a frustration that I think families have had and students and counselors is when someone says in the summer, what's your admit rate going to be, or how many kids are you going to admit? I can't answer that because
Yeah.
it really depends on the growth of applications. And we've seen double-digit growth every year for the last several years. So,
But do you have like targets for some of these programs where you're sort of told, listen, we kind of can't really be above this either because of faculty size, spacing, and
Yep.
and are there ones besides business, engineering, nursing, architecture, like music and other things that applies to as well, kind of thing?
Yeah, music's in there a little bit also, for some of their ensembles and
Sure.
yeah. And what's driving a lot of this too is things that are not academic, right? So it's housing space because first years are required to live on campus.
Yep.
It's parking, it's dining space, right? It's all those other resources. And so some colleges say, bring them on. Like we've got space, and we have to sometimes say, yeah, but we can't go over this number of students enrolled. And so we need to kind of figure out how do we manage that growth across college, even though they may have some additional space.
You ready for our lightning round, Fabrizio?
Let's do it, Mark.
All right. No more admissions talk for the day. Favorite TV show?
Oh, man, I shouldn't think about it, but lightning round.
Well, just so you know, everybody says this is the hardest part. You eat, sleep, drink, breathe admissions. You can just spew those questions out. This is the hard part.
Yeah, I watch TV all the time. I don't have an answer for it. Let's come back to that one.
All right. There you go. That's what I tell kids when I do interview prep. I say, when you get asked a tough question, rather than have 45 seconds of silence, just say, can we come back to that? Something that grinds your gears. Pet peeve.
Pet peeve. Well, and this will be admissions related, right? So
sure.
when I hear Tennessee families saying the University of Tennessee doesn't want Tennesseans.
Oh, yeah.
That drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Drives me nuts.
And that's something I think it's almost inevitable when you experience the growth and the surge of out-of-state apps. I know I've had other senior leaders like you tell me stories like this, off the air of stuff they encounter from the in-state crowd. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Your favorite sport?
Football.
Oh, of course. You're at the right place, but you're at the right place for it. that one was easy, a book you've read that you would recommend if you had. Our audience is mostly parents, college counselors, students, in that order. Could be anything. Could be nonfiction. Certainly doesn't need to be admissions related. Could be anything.
Yeah. So I've read Good to Great multiple times.
Yeah. Collins.
Yeah. And I always walk away with something new.
Yeah. That's a really good book. I think about it a lot. Actually, just getting on. Do you have the right people on the bus? Are they the right seat on the bus? There's a lot to think about, especially when you're in organizational leadership like you are, right? Makes a lot of sense. Your dream vacation?
I would love to have a vacation in the Amalfi Coast for a month.
Wow.
Just to be.
Yeah. Well, maybe someday. You can always dream big.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a pass on that TV question, but in closing, I want you to share your best advice for our three constituents in order parents, college counselors, students.
Yeah, I say this all the time to families and folks. I know this process, the admissions process, isn't easy all the time. And I know it can be stressful, but try to enjoy it, right? Because this is an opportunity for either the student you're counseling, your son or daughter, the student, to learn about themselves, to investigate what they're passionate about, what gets them excited, what kind of person they want to be and what their values are, and then find a place that they can grow and blossom kind of in based on all that. And so if you're going to do this and try to make it not stressful and to make it more fun, that means you got to start early, right? And I'm not talking as a freshman, but like as a sophomore, start thinking about it. If you're on vacation, go visit a school, right? We require, which is probably a whole other section that we don't have time for today in the podcast. We require self-reported academic report where you self-report your grades. Like you could start self-reporting grades as a freshman into this tool, right? So it's not as stressful. You have to do all 3 or 4 years. You can do them every year as you go. Start talking to people. Start going. If you want to be a nurse, mirror a nurse as a sophomore. But start to do the things early. And then as you get closer to the time when you're looking at colleges, create an Excel list, kind of put the list there, put the URL, put the deadline dates, right? There are so many things that can be done where this process that is stressful for many isn't. And actually, it's a great opportunity for the student to learn about themselves, but also bring the parents and the student together as they're doing these road trips, right? Because this is a time they're never going to get back. So I think that would be my advice.
I'm doing something. I'm breaking my rules here. I'm closing on an admissions question. You brought up SRAR, which is a source of a lot of angst for a lot of families. As a counselor, you're constantly getting questions. This class doesn't line up with this. And what's your advice for someone filling out the SAR? Because it's kind of a high anxiety experience for people. It's not always easy as a counselor to answer the very specific minutia type questions you get. I mean, I've literally been directing people to the school lately. And that's really what I've started doing is go to the school that's asking it and ask them. But
yeah, that's what you should do.
Okay.
So our counselors, we've got counselors all over the place, right?
Yeah.
If you go to our website, www.utk.edu, you can click on admissions. There's a place where you can find your counselor, plug in your state and county. It'll show you who your admissions counselor is and their contact info.
Awesome.
Call them, call the admissions office, and we will walk you through it. We'll get on a Zoom with you. It's 30 to 45 minutes of someone's time.
Mm-hmm.
That 30 or 45 minutes allows us to be able to process that app so you can meet the deadlines for competitive scholarships, like all these other things that if we were opening up 52,000 pieces of mail,
sure,
which is way more than that with transcripts and everything, this process would take far longer than it already does. And so
probably it's growing so fast because I noticed so many more schools are using the SAR than before.
Yeah, it creates a ton of efficiencies. And honestly, it puts the control in the student's hand, right? They can literally apply for admission, complete the SAR, attach and upload their scores on our portal, and have a completed app in our system in one evening.
Nice.
So,
Fabrizio, you have been most generous with your time. You gave me an hour and 40 minutes, and I know your time is really, really precious. I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing there and just your commitment to excellence, and really excited about getting this out to our thousands of listeners so the college counselors can know who better to refer, and the parents can decide whether they want to take a trip and to check you guys out. But you're doing great work.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I really enjoyed this. It's been less of a podcast and more of a conversation. So thank you.
Well, those are the best ones.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Take care. Thank you. Go Vols.
Awesome. Go Vols.
Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm finally getting time to do the deep dive I want to do, going through these 30 factors used to build a college list. And I really couldn't do it justice when I had a double interview. We had both the Andy Strickler interview going on and the same time as the Jin Chow interview. So On Monday's episode, it's just the Jen Chow interview, so I can really finally get back to letting you know the evolution of my thinking on these 30 factors that impact colleges that, you yourself select if you're DIYer, do-it-yourselfer, or if you're working with a college counselor. And so, friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. And I'm happy to be back home tomorrow, and you don't have to put up with this sad, sorry sound system I have as my temporary mic. Thanks for your patience with the sound quality in the last 3 weeks. What happened was I have a pretty good portable mic, a really good portable mic, and the cord broke on the first day. So I've been using a makeshift mic. So we'll get back to quality sound. So see you on Monday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.